Welcome everybody to the third official session of People Matters 2022. Employer branding, is it more important than marketing? I'm really glad to be running this session with a guest, Mr. Frank Ravanelli, who's joining me for this fireside chat style session. And I'd like to introduce him a little bit before we get into the main part of the session. So Frank is working for the Swedish beauty and luxury brand Foreo. He's been in digital marketing since 1995 and leading remote teams since 2003. In his current role, he is the head of global affiliates. He's currently in Spain, so it's great to have a speaker from another part of the world. And he's very passionate about this particular subject we're going to be talking about, which is why it's a great opportunity to have this chance to speak with him. Frank, thanks so much for joining the session as our guest today.
Thank you so much, Gordon. My pleasure.
So I guess my first question that I'm really curious to know about is, you are not, your title is not head of employer branding or an HR function as such, but in our conversations that we had before this session, you did say about how important you think this area is. It's one that I'm absolutely convinced is a really competitive advantage for the companies that have it. But perhaps maybe you could start by a little bit about your background and then why you think employer branding is an important topic that we should talk about today.
Sure. I started to develop opportunities for branding for our company towards talent, because I help with the digital operations. Before it was across the whole APAC region, and now I focus on Northeast Asia, so Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Our teams are all remote, so it's very important for us to attract the right talent. So as you said, I do not come from an HR background, but I come from marketing, digital marketing and managerial background. But I had to develop these skills, let's say, due to necessity, to attract the right type of candidates for our vacancies. And to explain why, for me and for us, for Foreo, it's very important to do employer branding is especially for the digital unit. As I said, we offer remote roles. So what it means from one side, well, we can offer flexibility. At the same time, in some countries like Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and before I helped also in Japan, a lot of candidates value more conventional types of employment, like going to office and face-to-face interactions, which of course are very important, but they don't happen daily for our teams. So one way to stand out is through employer branding. I would say the cost of attracting the right candidates and even more the cost of hiring someone who is not a mutual match are very high. So that's why it became very important to differentiate ourselves through this approach. And in terms of the benefits in general, I would say, what I mentioned basically, I think it depends a lot on the role. If you have roles which are easily interchangeable and you have a lot of vacancies, like a big company, may be able to reposition a talent. So someone who is good, but is not necessarily a good fit for a vacancy, may be repositioned in our opportunities across a company. For the digital teams, the size are not that big. So basically, we had to be very selective.
I definitely want to get into that kind of recruiting strategy that you've touched upon, but maybe just to make sure that we level up everybody in the audience and who's with us, and really make sure that we're all talking about the same topic and there's full understanding. Maybe we need to start with what is employer branding? And so I think, maybe we can start with a little bit of discussion about that, and then we can kind of go further down into it. For me, as a professional recruiter working on behalf of companies, when I am talking with candidates about an opportunity, and I mention a brand, a company which there is an opportunity at, people have a wide range of reactions. If they know the company, they will already have a certain amount of associations. If I say Nike, immediately everybody has an image of what Nike means to them. And that goes, of course, for very well-known companies. And for some people, those associations might be good, they might be bad, they might be directly received feedback or information, or indirect. Someone told them that company X is not a good place to work, for example. And so but they might have never have heard of the company. And so in that place, then obviously there was a role for us as talent acquisition specialists to present the company, and in terms of what exactly the company, how it operates, and how the candidate, the person that you're trying to attract, such as someone like yourself, how are they going to approach, and how are they going to be treated? And so that becomes the employer brand. That is, there is a very well-renowned ranking out there. It's called the Great Place to Work, and companies are ranked every year on the feedback that they get, the rating that they get from their own employees, but also from candidates, those who have had contact with the company. And all of that goes into the employer brand. And I think that it's clear that that's incredibly important, because if you have a good employer brand, a good reputation as a good place to work, it's going to be much easier to acquire the best possible people. And people will really, really want to go and work for you. Conversely, if you do not have a good employer brand, if your Glassdoor.com is another website that has a scoring system to evaluate companies. Every single person who is thinking about joining a company now these days is checking these kind of websites and trying to gain this impression, especially if it's for a company that they've never heard of. And I think in the current situation, when talent is scarce, and it is becoming increasingly a two-way kind of conversation about joining a company, then it becomes even more important than ever before. And so that's a little bit about kind of our perspective at RDI about what an employer brand is. And of course, I guess maybe from the marketing background, maybe I can ask Frank, is it the same thing as marketing? Is it, I mean, it's called employer branding. Is it the same thing as branding?
Well, what you mentioned applies to our industry and specifically to our teams as well, yes. In terms of how it's implemented, I think if you compare consumer branding to employer branding, I think employer branding is done in a bit different way. Like, of course, we could use LinkedIn and just boost our post and vacancies, so that's great. But there are a lot of, I would say, one-to-one interactions, sometimes with institutions, for example, universities, and sometimes with the candidates themselves. So I would say, if I compare the way personally I do employer branding for my teams and for Foreo versus how I do B2C marketing, I would say B2C marketing, it's very scalable, and it's done through more conversational type of marketing, while employer branding, I personally do it a lot with events like yours, so when we can connect with professionals, or universities. Universities for more entry-level positions, and events like yours for more senior type of talent.
Mm-hmm. And so if I was to, in a sense, be a potential candidate, somebody interested in joining your company, and I was to ask, how is your brand? Please describe it to me. What is it like to work at Foreo? What would you say?
Sure. Well, that's a question that many candidates ask. And it's interesting because I would say right now, more just say more entry position candidates are even more direct about the questions they pose, while more senior, I think they may be attracted also by the seniority of the positions they may be offered. So working at Foreo, keeping in mind that we are talking about the digital teams, it's very fast-paced. It has clear KPIs, and it also has a lot of room to experiment. So what I like to tell candidates is basically together we define the goals. So we are sure we are on the same roadmap. We are here to provide the tools to succeed, and of course we're here to share the best practices. However, each candidate, each team member is expected to find her or his or their way to succeed, because we operate in so many markets that, of course, I have understanding of digital across all countries, but then how it's applied locally, how you do it on Naver versus how you do it on Facebook, like it's up to the individual talent. So I make sure people understand that we do have clear goals. We do have a structure in terms of procedures. However, in terms of winning strategies, each person, no matter if it's junior or senior, is expected to come up with individual approaches. Of course, we have branding guidelines, but how they are applied when it's up to the person in a specific market.
Mm-hmm. And how formalized is your company's approach to employer branding? Are you're obviously a senior member of management within the company. Are all senior members involved as heavily and perceiving employer branding to be as important as you are, or are you a special case, or is there a specific team who are very much doing it and that you're working with? If you could tell us a bit about that, that would be great.
Sure. Yes, I would say even especially more during the last couple of years. It happened to coincide with COVID just by coincidence. I would say overall, globally, the company is very involved in employer marketing. So, for example, internship opportunities at a large scale, and this is coordinated from Sweden, so from our headquarters, and this is very, very active. How individual countries or individual business divisions take advantage and contribute to this, that's a bit more open to the individual manager. So I would say as a company, we are very committed. As an individual, I think I invest quite a lot of time and I get very rewarding results back. Not necessarily everyone does the same. That's up to the individual GM, if it's a country, or to the head of a division. And yeah, but as a company, yes, we do have coordinated activities which are run from the headquarters.
Understood. And you touched upon the benefits there. Tell me a bit more about some of the main benefits that you perceive that have emanated from this employer branding strategy.
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, it started as a necessity. So just to be, honest, like when we started to build the teams in around 2017, it was not easy to get. In some countries, it was very easy to get talent. In some countries, it was not. Like people didn't know what we meant in terms of as an employer. So the main benefit is we get way more proactive applications from relevant candidates. So people who actually have, the skills we need. And personally, I believe in the approach. I prefer to hire externally junior, and when possible, I prefer to promote internally to the more senior roles. The reason is, well, it's not always necessary to do this. Sometimes it's good to get fresh ideas from outside. But I'm just thinking, if I hire someone from outside, at a very senior role in my teams, then I'm telling to the rest of the team that no one else is basically ready for it. So that's why I try to have this approach, and most of the times it works. And with employer branding, we get a lot of interns that they can, understand if they actually like what it means for day-to-day work. We can see if they perform based on, what we thought they can perform, and then we can build it from there. So I would say we built a steady pipeline of talent. We attract proactive applications in a way easier manner than we did before. And I would say we have some times of a year, from October to December, there is like a Singles Day for some Asian countries. There is Black Friday nowadays, more or less all around the world, then December gifting. So we basically need a lot of talent for temporary positions. And it will be not easy to hire and go out and outreach without having employer branding in place, which gets this talent, temporary talent in place quite at a fast pace.
Got it. And you mentioned that your responsibility covers Korea. Obviously, RDI is based in Korea. Can you tell me about some of the specific activities or actions that you've been doing for the Korean market?
Sure. As I mentioned, taking part in industry events. I spoke at one of the marketing conferences there, and for example, in the short term, nothing happened, but then after like 6 to 24 months, I still have people, when there is a vacancy, pinging and just say like, hey, I saw you, at this event, and like, okay, I see that you have a vacancy, can we discuss? So I would say through industry events. We partner with universities. Well, so far in Korea, only once. So we have, our company is structured, we have one digital structure, then we have one local structure, then we have a B2C structure, and we have a B2B structure. So in this case, the local colleagues that, they study themselves at universities in Korea, or for example, in Malaysia for our countries. And so they make a connection with a university, and then I can speak there. Now with the COVID, it has been, this was more active when I was actually present, because before I was spending half a year in Busan and half a year in Europe. So when I was there physically, it was a bit easier. But for Korea, main activities, basically industry events. When people contact me through LinkedIn, I keep them posted if I see a good match, and partnership with universities. And our local and the digital team, when we need to grow, they can also refer people that studied with them or people that they worked with before. Yeah.
I mean, clearly, this is something that is at the forefront of your talent acquisition strategy, and your company culture, obviously, it is very much aligned to this. What's the next stage? What more are you trying to do? What in an element of continuous improvement, what would be some of the goals that you're looking to achieve in the next year or two?
Sure. I would say there are already a lot of team members who help with this. As I mentioned, we refer us to universities. What I've been trying, let's say, for about a year and a half, there is also an advantage of a current situation, but of course, traveling is very limited. But a lot of institutions are open just to have these virtual talks and so on, so we don't actually need to be there in person. So I'm trying to get all the team, at least the team members who are interested in becoming ambassadors themselves. So, in addition to myself doing this, also the rest of the team can contribute to employer branding. And I think they do have both a great interest in it, and also, well, a practical benefit that every time someone is added to the team, of course, there are great potential, there are also new dynamics. So the more involved they are in this, with being active in events or being active on LinkedIn, then the better it's also for them, because they may get to know the future colleagues themselves. in terms of paid activities, like personally, I mean, as a company, we do invest, as I said, of course, LinkedIn, vacancies, posting. As a digital team, I'm not investing budget in boosting posts. I believe more in being active and making this part of our strategy. Of course, it depends. Like some markets like Korea started to grow even more since basically end of last year. So if a number of vacancies starts to skyrocket, then I think I may have to rethink and actually start to invest directly in digital marketing for talent. But so far we are able to handle it this way, just by trying to make the program more inclusive for everyone who wants to contribute. Yeah.
I think you raise a great point there, and probably something of great interest to people on this session, which is that this is not a multi-million-dollar marketing budget type of activity. This is something that even without any, as you mentioned, your own team, direct monetary input is possible, especially smaller companies or startups who need to grow and need to acquire talent, but don't have extra budget to be able to do those kind of things. So if you were to try to make maybe, like I say, a practical guide for perhaps organizations which are not yet so far developed in employer brand, what would be some of the first most important steps, the kind of the easy wins, which you would recommend them to implement?
Sure. Well, I would say first a bit of self-analysis for the company, like as a company or as a team, what type of candidates do I want to attract? So for example, if you have a lot of senior positions available, then it's better to work together with professionals like you, and also probably to target these people events, but also like LinkedIn, and they may expect some high profile like brainstorming events. If you are targeting more, let's say, junior roles, or for example, if you work like us, we are not a startup, but as I mentioned, a lot of talent is remote. So you need to have a very, very flexible and genuine approach. Like, for example, would I like to have a multi-million budget for employer branding? Probably no, because I will not be able to keep it genuine. Like we will just be blasting maybe 3 types of messages to 3 types of audiences, but there is no real interaction. And also I could be victim of our success. Let's say that I get, if I get 10 people per week saying like, hey, how's life at Foreo? I can reply. But if I start to get like 10,000, then I would just have to say, speak with a hiring manager. So yeah, but of course I do understand if you are like a big company, let's say, let's speak about Korea, like Samsung, LG, like you offer substantial benefits, substantial, career improvement. So you will probably classify different type of vacancies you need, and you may have, of course, bigger budgets because you also have enough managers who can then follow up. But going down to a checklist, I would say point 1, ask yourself, what type of talent do you want? Point 2, speak with them and see, like, for example, you mentioned like if at the interview you would ask how is life at Foreo. So when you interview people who belong to this demographic, what do they ask you for? It's probably something that we mentioned so far. So be proactively answering this question through your outreach activities, so they already have a starting point when they contact you. And third, I would say, well, benchmark, like is your retention rate going up? Are you shortening the hiring pipeline? If the answer is yes, then it means what you're doing is, is working. You just need to kind of refine it a bit. If the answer is no, then maybe there is a mistake, which is doing employer branding in the way we think it should be done and not in the way the candidates want. So like a reality check. And then the next point is, optimize accordingly. If it's working, scaling it up, and if it's not working, well, go back to point 1 and re-go through the funnel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super practical, putting it into those steps. That's really great advice, Frank. Thank you. And I think also, to a certain extent, some of the questions which are coming through, we can kind of weave them into the discussion here, because somebody asked, how do you evaluate employer branding as effective or not? You just touched upon, time to hire, and ability to attract the right talents. Are those the main things? Would there be other elements that you think are important?
Well, we can have a basic sentiment analysis, like to see when it comes to our own teams and our own markets, if there is anything in the public domain you mentioned, like Glassdoor, or which refers specifically to what we do. Of course, I cannot evaluate company overall because, as I said, we have a dedicated team in Stockholm for that. But we analyze. It's not done. The B2C sentiment analysis is done through tools. You actually get thousands and thousands of statistics. This one is done more on a subjective kind of personal way, just to check what's available there. And I would say also, also important is retention of existing team members. So like, we explain how we work, we attract the talent, we are happy about them. Are they happy about us? Does the image we portray is, realistic? So also retention is very important, because of course, once we have them, we want, they perform, we want them to stay. Because, so I would say, again, the whole pipeline. And for the ones that do move to new opportunities, do they refer potential candidates, meaning that they may move to new opportunities, but they still like a company, or they just cut the bridge. So that's kind of a employee life cycle. I don't for retention, we do have metrics, like actual numbers. How many people we expect that we should be at least this number be able to keep. For the acquisition, and if in case we move on, we don't have a metric. For example, it needs to be done in a week or no. But still, we keep an eye. As long as it keeps improving, then it means we're going in the right direction. Then I have to say, because we are talking about teams of size of a few dozens people, because we're talking about digital. If you would talk about a company of thousands of people, I think you may need to have metrics at each stage, starting from basically hiring, like how many relevant applications do you get, and how many of the successful candidates actually accept the job offer. That would be metrics that I would suggest to keep in consideration.
Sure, I think they're absolutely key, and I really like the way that you go beyond the employer brand. That it's not just current employees. These so-called ambassadors of your brand can be for life. If anybody asks me about the first company that I joined, that I stayed with for 3 years, I always have immensely positive things to say about it, because I had such a good experience at that company. And so I think that's where, in this very much peer review type of direct feedback type of world, that authenticity is really what makes the difference between companies with a good and bad employer brand. And also, to your point about, you can have the best perceived employer brand, but if you don't actually act it out and walk the walk by having those employee, that retention, and then that positive ambassador type of relationship, then it catches up with you, and you're no longer considered a good employer brand. Okay, and a couple of other questions here. Somebody asked about if you had to focus on one aspect of the employer brand, what would you kind of consider to be most important? They list company vision, company values, or company culture.
That's a very good question. I would say, again, if possible, I would reconnect that to your hiring goals. So I would say, if you're hiring senior management, then they also deal themselves with, let's say, vision and higher values. So I would focus on that, like where you see yourself as a company, usually in 5-10 years, and kind of make sure that you make that part of your employer branding. On the other hand, if you are more like hiring for junior roles, or if you are a startup, I would say, yeah, you have to focus on how you make the world a better place, which is still part of a vision, but also make sure people understand what it means for them in day-to-day life, because when you are in a company which is already on track, you already have, let's say, good karma from the past, and things already be done, and it may be mainly about maintenance, and of course having some great improvements along the way. It's like let's say incremental improvement. So that's the message you want to convey, like we are here to do things better. If you are a startup, well, we are here to discover how to do things, because we have no idea how to do it, because we are kind of creating the space or even creating the organization. So I would focus, yes, on values, but depending on how fast-paced and how structured or unstructured the day-to-day work is, I would like to suggest you make it part of your communication. So don't try to look like a 300 years old successful established bank if you're just a startup, because then it's gonna backfire. Like you're gonna get great talent, but they're gonna get burnt out because they're not used to being unstructured working culture. And at the same time, you can get great talent, which is dynamic and maybe the best fit for you. So yeah, values are important, but especially for like mid to frontline roles, I will make sure you actually portray how the day-to-day, like what does it, let's say you're hiring for content marketing, like have a team member of your team telling you like, well, every day I'm there, like half of the day I speak with existing talent, and half of the day I kind of cold contact potential new talent that I'm not in touch with. You as my potential colleague, do you feel comfortable doing the same? Or would you rather work only with new talent, or would you rather work only with existing talent? So yeah, I would also involve as much as possible the rest of your colleagues, so they can actually relate to the people that will be doing the same work.
Yeah, yeah. For me, I think my personal take on that is it's not an either or on those aspects of the company. Rather, just try to be as open as possible. Just literally communicate often and comprehensively, exactly around the what you mentioned, a kind of a day in the life of is one good example of what is it really like to work there. So when you're saying that our values are this, you can see that they are from the person who's working there. Vision, again, the testimony of the employee validates that, and the corporate culture is viewed by how they are working, what atmosphere they're working, and etc. So I think that you can almost achieve all of those by just opening up your employer brand to your target in order to achieve that. I also love the fact that you mentioned, if I understand correctly, that you're advocating to involve as many people as possible in the employer branding initiatives. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's where maybe even especially in Korea, that often HR resources are sometimes limited relative to the number of employees, and it just feels maybe for a lot of HR professionals that employer branding is there's not a instant ROI. And so therefore it becomes lower down on the list of priorities. But what you're saying is that employer branding can be achieved if more resources, more of the company are involved in it, and then it's dispersed, and of course then more can be achieved.
Yeah, exactly. I would say it's too important Well, HR is amazing, of course. Every HR department is amazing, but it's too important a priority for a company to be handled just as a task, just by one department. I think it's like a collective, effort, and the benefits are also for the whole company. So everyone who feels can contribute, I think it's good to give them an option to be part of it. Yeah.
And now in the current environment, we've got a lot more virtual working, distributed work environment. The very first session that we kicked off with today was about the metaverse, where everybody in that company is entirely in distributed status. And a question which is, what about people working remotely? How can you promote employer brand in that way?
Sure. Well, my personal experience, I would say it's 100% with remote talent, because everyone in my teams is remote. Of course, we do have people working in the office, but that's for the local structure or for the B2B structure. One way, I mean, I can share my personal experience. Again, no budget, but I hope, high benefit for the people who participate. I gave a lot of presentations about my personal experience with working remotely. So I would say, have a manager who has direct experience. So maybe not the policy. I mean, it's great to have someone who sets a policy, but also someone who actually has been doing it her or himself. If they share best practices, if they kind of discuss the myths of working remotely and make sure that people understand what the reality is, then people will listen. Of course, not everyone will join your company, but that's not the goal of this type of interactions is to help people to work better in general. You can do the same, like, if you have a Naver blog, if you have a LinkedIn articles, like just share your genuine, like top 3 suggestions for working remotely. Yeah, personally, I would say it's even more important for remote talent, because people who regularly go to office, one way or the other, there is actually a physical, company culture. Like they walk through the building, they will enter the door of the office. Like many of these things have been designed to convey a certain image. If your office is in Gangnam, it's different than if it's maybe somewhere else in a startup area or out of Seoul. So yeah, when you are remote, well, you just go to back office, which is more or less the same for every company. In this case, it's very important what you do with your existing talent, which is like we have a get-togethers virtual, then we have like the warriors of the quarter, like it's not the best performing because they're all doing great, but we need to pick one which for one reason stands out, and we reward her or like him with a special gift, and also we acknowledge. So I would say not only in terms of employer branding, but in terms of company culture, remote requires a lot more direct initiatives, because all the kind of implicit communication which happens when you meet on the elevator and so on, it's not going to happen otherwise. So yeah, I think considering the direction of the employment work to have more distributed teams, it will become a priority even more for this type of workforce.
Right. Yes, I can see how that can be the case because of that almost effortless interactions that happen to reinforce the employer brand. Maybe a kind of challenge for multinationals operating in Korea that we work a lot with. It seems to be also a question here from the audience, which is to localize or globalize. How at your company, to what extent around the employer brand are you localizing the content and the activities?
Well, that's a very good question, and I mean the ones I'm directly involved myself, well, they need to be English, Italian, or Spanish, just for my language. I did try to study Korean, and my wife, she's successful at studying it, but I had to basically, well, for me, I was not able to continue. So I would say things I do directly, but they need to be in the language I speak. However, I would say it's very important to have local, once you hire, let's say, if you are a Korean company and you want to expand in France, you will probably have Korean senior management, and you will have like junior to mid-level French native speakers. So in that case, make sure that your company image is consistent, because in the internet now it takes a second to compare how you convey a message in one place to another. At the same time, make sure that the activities are in the local language as much as possible, unless for example, in our company, I mean, we require good English fluency for everyone. So it means if I would do employer branding, someone who speaks, let's say, only Vietnamese and not English, it will not be a suitable candidate for my team anyway, because we will not hire that person. So I would say if you plan big teams and the working language will be the local language, then yes, it's very important to make sure you include existing employees who speak a local language. However, if your strategy, like ours, is basically, we need English anyway, so we will not, we can have localized activity, but it's not going to attract necessarily the right type of talent for us. So again, it comes down to your goals. You can do both, just understand which is going to bring you the best candidates for your company culture.
Mm-hmm. So employer branding is something that begins even before somebody is considering to join the company, right? Because it is, you have the consumer brand, which is the general perception, which is to a certain extent interwoven with the people that work for the company, who can be observed, that you can, in the course of daily life, get a perception or hear a reputation, right? And so in some sense, you know, the target for that particular talent that you're trying to acquire will have usually, ideally, have already have some kind of perception or idea. But it seems that a lot of companies just seem to think that that it starts maybe at the time of hiring, like kind of like day one, like how do we treat our people, and therefore what I can see very much at the forefront within recruiting is that the ability to attract and acquire that talent is from the very first conversation that we have with that candidate. So with that in mind, how do you approach that in a sense of, we talked already about very kind of targeted approach, how to address that kind of wider reputation?
Sure. Well, in our case, I have to say, as Foreo, we are quite lucky, because basically most of the type of talent we need to work with us, it's also our ideal user. So basically, many of them, maybe they didn't know anything about our employment kind of opportunities, but they knew a lot about the brand. So I mean, I'm grateful to activities that we and the rest of the colleagues do in terms of B2C, because they do help a lot to build up. So when they come to the job interview, they already know what the company stands for, at least for the consumer. Then what it means to work with us, they need to find out through the interview. But I agree with you. I mean, it's very important. I would say it comes down, I would say maybe to the size of the company. Like if you are a big company, the history and the reputation may be stronger than the individual interaction. Like because the company has its own kind of track record of charity, did they develop sustainable products or not? When the company is a startup or maybe, you know, medium-sized business, I think my impression is it really comes down to my interaction with that person. Like, does that person sees me as a, you know, decent human being or not? Because that part can override the image they have of a brand, unless they are a heavy user and then they're already, you know, in love with us, and then that's what we stand for in their minds. Yeah.
And I fully agree. You know, that interaction, the very first contact will, you know, so formative in people's desire and motivation to join the company. What does your company do? Anything to try to make that as ideal as possible, to make that as effective as possible?
Sure. Well, I would say in terms of hiring practices, we do have, of course, established procedures, which is taken care by the hiring, the hiring manager together with HR. We don't have specific rules, like we are pretty, I mean, we value a lot open discussion. So that's why we don't have like specific, you know, guidelines, like you should do this or should not do that. So I would say one way the company invests in this, in our case, is by giving freedom to us as, you know, managers to take the opportunity and direction we want with the candidate. So yeah, I think that's one way. I would say if you are in a highly regulated environment, like you know, pharmaceutical company, probably there would be specific, you know, more specific guidelines, and you would maybe have to go through a checklist to make sure you always deliver, you know, a kind of FDA compliant approach, even through that point of contact. So yeah, in our case, basically there is quite a high degree of freedom. That's why it's super important for me. I hire the right people because they have, I mean, I would not say they have power necessarily, but they have a lot of room to make their own decisions. And that's why when they speak with a, you know, former schoolmates or potential candidates, they attract also the right type of person. If you are in a different industry, you probably need to have maybe the HR sitting on the call at every step to make sure it goes in the, you know, right direction and so on. Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds that from what you're saying, that Foreo is in a good place with the culture, but also the mutual cooperation throughout the organization. If in the scenario of a company not being in such a already optimized place, would you actually advocate HR being more proactive towards the hiring managers and maybe getting involved to really try to improve that process?
Well, definitely, yes. I would always focus on benefits. I would, you know, if I would be HR and the hiring manager is not very interested, I would say, well, do you want to get candidates which will deliver results and they stay? Or are you willing to take a risk of, you know, getting the wrong candidates? And if a hiring manager tells that, well, I'm okay with taking the risk, maybe there is one new vacancy, like maybe that person, I know I'm a bit mean, but maybe it's better to change that person because you're not putting the company interest in the, you know, at the forefront of the decisions. Yeah.
I want to keep running with this hypothetical scenario. The person says, look, I'm doing great results. I'm achieving so much. You can see that, but I just don't have time to be involved in the hiring and the recruiting process. How would you counter that?
Well, in some cases, it may be a reasonable, you know, answer. Then I would say, okay, to whom do you delegate? Like if you don't do it yourself, like you delegate to someone that you trust, because you cannot say like, oh, well, it went bad because I delegated to Jane or John. Well, you delegate, or you do it yourself if you are willing, able, and have a time. If you don't, it may make sense because especially some time of the year, like, you know, I will not be able to do employer branding 5 days before Singles Day. because we have so much, like we already work, you know, like 14 hours just to do the basic marketing. So there may be some situation where it makes sense, but then I would say, well, if not now, can you do it in a month? And if you cannot do it in a month, who from your team are you delegating to, being aware that you take a responsibility for that person's success. So I would say it's way too, like, unless, what I like to tell people is this, like, if something can be substituted by a script, meaning that, like a software script, meaning that every candidate is just, you know, interchangeable, then don't even hire a person, just develop a script and that script can do it for you. If a robot can do it, don't hire a person, just build a robot. But considering most, you know, all the jobs we have require talent and not scripts, then, I mean, I really see it as we must be involved. So I would say, first I will give to this, if there is resistance inside the company, I would say, well, let's find a solution together. But if there is no willingness to find a solution, I will probably tell that manager, well, maybe you're great in your technical skills, but it's very unlikely that you can stay as a manager if you don't care about people. Because, I mean, maybe you are great at, you know, you're a great engineer. Awesome, then develop your plans, but you will not grow as a leader unless you take care of people, because then eventually you will need engineers to work. If you build a small thing, you can do it yourself. But, you know, if you want to go to space, you need a team to get there. Like, even if you are Leonardo da Vinci, I mean, you're not going to be able to do it alone. So I think basically it will become a wider conversation about who you want to be as a talent. Do you want to be technical, or you want to be a leader? If you want to be a leader, one way or the other, we will need to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that for me is where you have really struck a bullseye, right? Because if the person is just a high performer, doesn't have any interest in people, then fine, be an individual contributor. But you know, if you're a team leader, a division head, or anybody managing people, then it has to be a part of the conversation, the work, and the evaluation, right? Every part of that. I think that's very important. I want to open up also for questions. We have taken questions kind of throughout the discussion, which has been really good so far. We've got around 5 minutes left. One question that has popped up here is, do you think that a company needs to have a good branding towards the government in order to fill demand of hiring non-locally? Not sure if there's a specific kind of background to that question, but
exactly, yeah. Okay, that's a very good question, and I think if you are in regulated industries and your clients, I mean, your buyers are basically institutional buyers, meaning that you benefit from hiring some of these former employees in order they already have a network, they know how it works. I mean, I would say in general, it's always good to have you know, good relations with any stakeholder. Sure. Exactly. Sure. Yeah. And I mean, even before that, make sure you know the local laws. I mean, that's very important. So I would say, yeah, I think the answer is yes. If for any reason you need to hire from that sector. If you don't need to hire from that sector, then I mean, it's always good. But personally, I focus more on universities than governments. But well, maybe if I can put the question in a more context, we can reevaluate. Yeah.
Sure. That's good. And then you know, perhaps what I here's like direct feedback from talent pools in Korea, of course, is that the traditional larger Korean companies don't care about the individual. You know, the first question of the interview when their job is, you know, why should we hire you? And which is it's a valid question, but the equal question of why should I work for you is one that just doesn't come into the dialogue. Whereas, of course, at the other end of the scale, we have companies who, rather than having kind of interview panel, 5 people on the panel, 1 candidate, which is totally overwhelming, they run much more kind of simultaneous interview stages with more parts of the business, and that it would seem to have 2 major benefits as I see. One, there is a more objective decision on the person because more people are involved from different parts of the business. But secondly, from the candidate perspective, it also gives them more insight about what it's really like to work there, because they get exposure to more people. I mean, if you only get 1 hour with HR and 1 hour with hiring manager, you're putting yourself up for a big decision without a lot of information. And so I think that I'm not advocating 10 interview rounds. I think that's equally bad, but I think that at least having the chance to meet more people in the organization, and maybe not in a sequential process, but a simultaneous process. So it doesn't have to be a multi-month long process. It has to be quick. Can be a good compromise. How do you run things at your company in that aspect? Any difference between Korea and other countries, for example?
Well, first I would like to emphasize what you mentioned. Like, I think it's great to have multiple levels of seniority and multiple potential future colleagues, but at the same time, because I read a lot of horror stories, not in Korea, but in North America, where basically people go through 7 rounds. I think a maximum you can have is HR pre-screens a candidate, just to make sure there is a mutual understanding of the foundation. Then there is a real chat with a hiring manager. And maybe there is, if it's a very critical role, like an hour chat with the boss of a hiring manager, just to make sure that it fits overall in the company structure. Of course, I mean, we're not talking about CMO roles, so that would be different, but we're talking about 99.9% of a vacancy. So at our company, it would be how I mentioned now. So pre-screening, real interview, potentially an hour interview. I think if I need to interview a person 3 times because I'm not sure about that person, then probably means it's not a good match. Of course, there is always a degree of mistake, like maybe some people are more outspoken, so they achieved more, and some people, they're more quiet, and in reality, they're really good. But when you speak with them, maybe you don't understand at once that everything that they were capable of. So an invitation to candidate would be, I mean, of course, never be super kind of overselling yourself, but at the same time, don't be shy. Like, if you brought $10 million in sales to your company with something that it's actually attributed to you, unless it's confidential information, save it. But yeah, and I think in terms of the companies to have these big committees, I mean, I think it's good. Also, as a candidate, first it gives you information, and then it gives you also information that probably everything big you may want to do at that company will require the approval of 10 people. Do you want to work for this company? Some people prosper in this type of environment, that's great. Me, probably I will not, because if I get approval from 10 people, it's easier for me just to test it with a consumer, and the consumer tells me if it works or not. So basically, it's it's very good to have it, because it also tells you as a candidate about your future life there, if you are a mutual match. Yeah.
Great. Well, on that note, we have come to the end of the session. Frank, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences around this important topic. If people want to reach out or any further steps, what can you suggest?
Sure. First, thank you, Gordon, for the great opportunity. I also learned a lot from this interaction, and thanks for the questions we received from the audience. And I would say, well, Frank at Foreo.com or LinkedIn, Frank Ravanelli. And if anyone, has opportunities like universities want to talk about digital careers or our events, and we are always open just to explain our personal experience, which may or may not be reflected in the one of our people, but at least contributes to it. But again, thank you so much, Gordon, for the great chat. Thanks.